Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Liverpool. And it's been a hot minute since we did one of these Let's Talk Liverpool episodes. It's been almost nearly 3 weeks since we played last in the Premier League out against Wolves. The international break is now gone. It was a fairly good one from an England perspective, but now, fortunately, there are no more international breaks between now and the end of the season, before obviously we go into the Euros this summer. It was a game in which there was a lot of pressure riding on both teams, really, particularly given the fact of Chelsea's shock defeat at home to West Brom as well, which meant that the teams chasing for the top four, and I would count Arsenal in that, although it's, I think, a much slimmer chance of getting in the top four than even ours, but I would still count them as there, and if they can pull it together a good run, there's no reason why they can't be considered as part of the top four race, even though they're down in 9th now, I think. Yeah, so it was a high stakes game going into it. Liverpool, from our perspective, you know, we still need to correct all of those months of poor form that we had towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and so it was important for us to get a bit of a roll in terms of positive results, particularly also going into the Champions League this week as well. And yeah, obviously, when you come back from the international break as well, it's very easy, I think, sometimes for the games to kind of pass certain teams by, and for the team to not maybe be as kind of cohesive and gelled as it was, you know, when they're playing week in, week out. But we saw absolutely none of that from Liverpool throughout the game. Absolutely fantastic performance, and we'll deconstruct what bits of the performance I thought were so impressive a little later on in this episode. But overall, it was just fantastic. Like, everything we could have wanted from a game to rebuild our confidence, we got from this game, and that was partly in due to Arsenal. And I'll also touch on Arsenal a little bit in this episode as well. But they were abysmal, like really, really bad. I talked just there about being lethargic and, you know, not gelling after an international break, and Arsenal were the very worst example of that. They were horrendous, but we'll talk about that a little later on. But going into the game, a couple of changes into the team. The back five was the solid back five. Andy Robertson and Ozan Kabak were the only ones who actually went away on international duty out of that back five. So it was good to have a kind of bit of a fresh team, particularly the back five. And obviously, you know, there was much spoken about Trent's omission from the England squad, and again, we'll talk about that today in this episode. But he showed again, like, 100% why he's the best right back in the Premier League, and I don't care form or no form. Gareth Southgate has shown many times that he's still going to pick some of his favourite players in the squad. I'm not sure how Carl Walker's got anywhere near the squad based on his kind of season and just how haphazard he is, whereas Trent can't. But we'll talk a bit about that later on as well today. And then going into midfield, obviously the engine of the midfield had a very demanding international break, particularly Gini Wijnaldum. But Fabinho had a break, which was good, and so we saw Thiago, Fabinho and James Milner in the midfield. Going into the game, I was talking to a couple of friends, definitely predicted that James Milner would be coming into the team, just because of he had a break from the international break, but Arsenal is typically a game where we've needed a bit of experience in there in the middle. In the last couple of games, particularly the Emirates, sometimes we've been overrun a bit in midfield, but so I think it was important for James Milner to slot in. And then Roberto Firmino coming back from his injury, the international break and there not being any South American qualifiers allowed him time to recover. And then Salah and Mane, who were away for their respective countries, were back as well. Diego Jota, again, someone that I think going into the game I would have really wanted to start, given both his form for Portugal and his form for Liverpool since he came back from his injury. But I completely understand why Jurgen Klopp didn't decide to play him, given the fact that I think he pretty much completed 390 minutes or very close to that for Portugal, and some really demanding qualifiers there as well. But obviously as well, thinking and looking ahead to that Real Madrid game in the week 2. First half was a very... I don't know how to describe the first half, really. It was a team... Well, Liverpool dominated it, right? And that was strange to see, I think, given the midfield that you saw from Arsenal that they put on. Yes, they've got some injuries, but they had the likes of Odegaard, Ceballos, Thomas Partey in there. Those are players that can get on the ball, run a game, and dictate the way a team plays. But we were just fantastic, and a couple of things we were fantastic at. So the pressing from the front was really, really good, and it was energetic, and it was at the right times, which meant that Bernd Leno was forced to just kick the ball long, right, and boot it long so many times. And against Lacazette, Phillips and Kabak were going to win that duel every day of the week, and that's exactly what they would have wanted, right? They much prefer long balls. High up in the air for them to defend rather than intricate play in and around them, which is obviously a lot more difficult to defend. But the thing that we did so impressive was when they did kick it long, and either we won the header or, on the odd occasion where Lacazette or Aubameyang, for example, won the header, we were always first to the second ball. And that was huge because that just stopped anything from Arsenal's perspective. The ball was, we won that second ball. It was either going into Fabinho or Thiago. And that just enabled us to then win the ball back so quickly and then continue to put the pressure onto Arsenal. And I think they were never really escaped those shackles throughout the entire game, really. And I think that for me was a real key reason why we dominated the game, why we just took control of the game from almost the first minute, and ultimately ended up winning the game so comfortably. And I think a big part of that is the role of Fabinho. So he's someone that much was spoken about when he went into centre back position when we needed him. Now that we've got, touch wood, a centre back partnership that seems to manage to stay fit and not get injured, in terms of Phillips and Kabak, that's allowed Fabinho to move back into the midfield. We've seen just like how good he is in that position, and a lot of that winning the second ball, etc., cutting out those balls into the likes of Lacazette on Aubameyang was all done by Fabinho, and he showed how important he is both defensively and in the second half with his, I guess, kind of assist for Mo Salah's goal, how important he can also be moving forward as well with his balls from deep when he acts as that kind of quarterback type position. But the good thing what I saw in the first half was that we were creating chances, and most notably the chance where Trent Alexander-Arnold got to the byline, cut it back to James Milner, who should have buried it. The whole left-hand side of the goal was open, but for some reason he maybe was trying to get it too far in the corner, and it ultimately ended up bending wide and going wide. But we were keeping the ball, we were pressing, we weren't necessarily getting too many shots on target, but we were pushing and probing, and it very much, for me, resembled the kind of team and kind of form and confidence we're in at the moment, where things were going well, we were doing good things. It's just that clinical nature in the final third was the bit that was missing. And I'm sure Klopp would have talked to the players about that at half-time, going, we're doing everything right. If you keep doing this Arsenal team and this Arsenal defence will crumble. And that's very much what happened in the second half. And the catalyst for that obviously was the bringing on of Diogo Jota, who came on around about the hour mark. Andy Robertson coming off as well. And the change in formation was an interesting one, and I think it really gives maybe a bit of a hint to how we will play in some of the Premier League games we have the rest of the season, where Diogo Jota goes up front in that Firmino role, but very much plays as a striker, not as like kind of a deep lying striker like Firmino normally is. But with Diogo Jota going up there, it allows Firmino to come deeper, and then for us to have almost two midfielders behind Firmino who are a bit more kind of sitting midfielders. And particularly with the Premier League games we have for the rest of the season, other than really Manchester United, we've got the likes of Leeds, Aston Villa, Burnley, West Brom, Newcastle, teams that will inevitably sit back against us. I think that the possibility of that front four playing together, I think, is really promising, and I'm glad Klopp played it in a game against a team that are a big team. Yes, they didn't play very well at all, but that he showed he had faith in those players, but also the defensive players behind him, in our solidity that he could play those four attacking players and not be fearful that we were going to concede at the other end. But the goal did come in the 60-ish minute. It was a good bit of play. The ball came out to Roberto Firmino in the middle of the park, and he picked up that exact position that he normally picks up when he's playing as a number 9, but the position he picks up is even more effective when he picks it up in the number 10 role, when there's still another striker in front of him, which was Diogo Jota in this case. But he threaded the ball out to Mo Salah wide, which was great. Trent Alexander-Arnold initially made a run, but checked his run and then swung in an absolutely beautiful cross. It was just perfect based on Jota's timing of his run, etc. And it was just a very easy header. Bernd Leno arguably should have done better, but Diogo Jota was almost on the 6-yard box and just powering a header. And I wouldn't blame Bernd Leno too much if I was an Arsenal fan, but that is exactly what we needed. That that kind of clinical finishing and that fantastic cross from Trent Alexander-Arnold was huge and really set us on the way for the rest of the performance in the second half. I just want to talk a bit about Trent. I mentioned at the beginning, obviously he was left out of the England squad, which was a bit of a shock for everyone, I think. And I think, you know, for Trent Alexander-Arnold in his career so far, he hasn't, in his footballing career exactly, he hasn't really faced too much adversity. Yes, there's been some critics about his defending, etc. But in terms of everything's been a progression from him, a really positive progression in terms of, you know, getting in the team first of all, then making that right back position his own, and then helping us get to a Champions League final, and then winning the Premier League, and then winning the Champions League, etc., etc. And so this was the first time his form had really dipped, and it was really good to see his reaction. There was obviously the clip that came out after the goal, where when he crossed the ball and he just looked like so relieved and so happy. And I think that's just him again then showing to everybody the quality and value he can bring. And I think Gareth Southgate's absolutely ridiculous if he's not going to have him in the England team over the likes of Reece James, Kieran Trippier, Kyle Walker, who I think Trent is a lot better than, not only offensively, in terms of his quality, but I think also defensively as well. Reece James, I don't think is a very good defender. Kieran Trippier is okay, and I know Gareth probably trusts him. And then Kyle Walker, I think, is an absolute liability, be it on the right hand side of a 3, or as a right back in a 4. So I don't know what Gareth's thinking, and I think Trent, for example, for me, has to be part of that starting back for England going into the Euros. But after that goal, Arsenal were poor, and honestly, they got even worse afterwards. They lost all composure. The second goal was just a nice flicked ball over the top from Firmino. As I said there before, he brings a lot to the team defensively in that number 6 position, but he also brings a lot to the team, particularly when he acts as kind of a quarterback offensively as well. And that ball in behind led to Salah, and then it was just an easy finish through the legs of Burton Leno. And then Arsenal just really fell apart, and they were trying to play the ball out from the back, and it was just a really poor ball. They looked uninterested. After Kieran Tierney went off, they just looked like they lacked that fight in the back 4. Yeah, honestly, it was just a bit of a shocking performance from them. Overall, it was really, really poor. And then Jota scored the second goal. We could have scored a couple more after that. And it just showed that those couple of chances we had after it was 3-0 just showed this will do good for our confidence, but also there's still those niggling doubts and that lack of cutting edge when it comes to taking those chances first time. But overall, there's not too much to complain about. And in terms of the shout out to Klopp, I think for me, I was just glad he played with those front 4 and he gave them a good half an hour in that formation. And I definitely think that's the way forward when we play some of the other teams in the remaining part of this season. But that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure to subscribe down below if you're not already, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.